John Kennedy finds out his driver is homeless. What he does next will melt your heart. The rain was relentless, hammering against the tinted windows of the sleek black sedan as it glided through the quiet streets of Baton Rouge. Darius Wells gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, though his mind was elsewhere. The dashboard clock glowed 11:52 p.m., and the wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. In the back seat, Thupper Senator John Kennedy sat, his phone casting a faint blue light across his face as he scrolled through emails. "Thanks, Darius," Kennedy said, his Louisiana drawl warm but distracted. "Same time tomorrow," Darius nodded, his voice steady, despite the exhaustion creeping into his bones. "Yes, sir. 7:00 a.m. Sharp." Kennedy glanced up, catching a glimpse of Darius in the rearview mirror. The man's face was etched with fatigue, dark circles framing his eyes, and his blue, button-up shirt, clean but slightly wrinkled, looked like it had seen better days. Kennedy frowned but said nothing, slipping his phone into his coat pocket as Darius pulled up to the senator's residence. "Good night, sir," Darius said, holding the door open despite the rain soaking his sleeves. Kennedy nodded, pausing briefly under the porch light. "You take care now, Darius. Get some rest." As the senator disappeared inside, Darius slid back into the driver's seat, waiting until the front door closed before pulling away into the stormy night. Darius drove slowly, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windshield. He wasn't heading home, not to an apartment or a house, but to a grocery store parking lot on the edge of town. For 8 months, that lot had been his refuge, a place where he could park his sedan, recline the driver's seat, and sleep under a thin blanket. At 32, Darius Wells was homeless, a fact he hid with meticulous care. By day, he drove for a private car service, chauffeuring important clients like Senator Kennedy. By night, he delivered food for an app, scraping together every dollar to pay off the medical debt that had piled up during his mother's battle with pancreatic cancer. The debt was a mountain looming over every decision, every moment. But Darius refused to let it define him. In the glove compartment, tucked beneath a stack of napkins, was his phone loaded with PDFs of engineering journals he read when the world was quiet. He'd been halfway through an electrical engineering degree when his mother got sick, and though he'd had to drop out, he hadn't let go of the dream. Not entirely. That night, as Darius parked in his usual spot, far from the streetlights, he checked his watch, 12:47 a.m. He had 4 hours before he needed to drive to the gym for a shower, and get to Kennedy's place by 7:00 a.m. The gym membership was a luxury at $30 a month, but it gave him a place to stay clean, to maintain the appearance of a man who had it together. He reclined the seat, pulled the blanket over his shoulders, and closed his eyes, the rain's steady rhythm lulling him into a shallow sleep. Across town, John Kennedy sat in his study, the rain drumming against the windows. He couldn't shake the image of Darius's tired eyes, the way his shirt seemed to hang a little looser each day. Something was off, though Kennedy couldn't put his finger on it. He'd been riding with Darius for nearly a year, and the man was flawless, always on time, always professional, always knowing the fastest routes through Baton Rouge's unpredictable traffic. Kennedy trusted him, which was why he requested Darius for every trip. But tonight, that trust was tinged with curiosity. He made a mental note to pay closer attention. 2 nights later, the senator's schedule ran late. A meeting with constituents had dragged on, and it was past 1:00 a.m. when Kennedy finally called for his car. Darius arrived within minutes, his sedan pulling up to the curb outside the state office building. "Sorry to keep you this late," Kennedy said, sliding into the back seat. "No trouble at all, sir," Darius replied, his voice polite but strained. "Where to?" Kennedy hesitated, rubbing his chin. "Actually," Can you take me to the old community center on Oak Street? I forgot something there earlier. Darius nodded, merging into the empty streets. The drive was quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of Kennedy's phone as he typed. But the senator wasn't working. He was watching Darius, noting the way he stifled a yawn, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was looking. Long day, Kennedy asked, keeping his tone casual. Since 5:00 a.m., Sir Darius answered, his eyes on the road. Kennedy raised an eyebrow. That's what? 20 hours. You get any rest between shifts? Darius's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting Kennedy's for a split second. I manage, sir? When they reached the community center, Kennedy glanced at his phone, pretending to read a message. Hold on. Looks like I don't need to stop here after all. Just take me home, Darius. The driver nodded, turning the car around. As they drove back through the city, Kennedy's mind churned. Darius was good, too good for something not to be wrong. The man was working himself to the bone, and for what Kennedy had seen plenty of hard workers in his years in politics. But there was something different about Darius, something that nagged at him. On a whim, he spoke up. I'm starving. There's a 24-hour diner on Jefferson Highway. Mind stopping there? Darius didn't hesitate. Not at all, sir. At the diner, Kennedy insisted Darius join him. It's 2:00 a.m. and you've been driving all day. You gotta eat something. Darius protested politely, but Kennedy waved him off. Come on, my treat. Inside, they slid into a worn booth, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow. Kennedy ordered a burger and coffee. Darius, just coffee. You're not eating? Kennedy asked, leaning back. Not too hungry, sir, Darius said, his fingers tightening around the mug. Kennedy studied him, noticing the careful way Darius sipped his coffee as if stretching it out. When the waitress brought Kennedy's food, Darius ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a single slice of toast. Call me John when we're not working, Kennedy said, taking a bite of his burger. And get something more than toast, will you? Darius managed a small smile, sticking with the toast. As they ate, Kennedy kept the conversation light, asking about Darius's favorite routes or the quirks of Baton Rouge traffic. But he noticed something else when Darius thought Kennedy wasn't looking. He wrapped half the toast in a napkin and slipped it into his pocket. The gesture was quick practiced, and it hit Kennedy like a punch. This wasn't just tiredness. This was survival. After they finished, Kennedy leaned back. I'm beat. Think I'll call another car from here. You go home, get some rest. Darius blinked, surprised. You sure, Sir John, I can drive you? Kennedy shook his head. I'm sure. Go on now. Darius nodded, thanking him before heading to his car. Kennedy watched him drive away, then pulled out his phone, canceling the car service he'd just called. Instead, he dialed his assistant, Claire. I need you to do something for me, he said quietly. Track a vehicle. Discreetly. 30 minutes later, Kennedy's own car pulled into a deserted parking lot near a shuttered supermarket. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. In the far corner, away from the streetlights, sat Darius's sedan. Kennedy's driver slowed, and the senator stepped out, his breath visible in the chilly air. He approached the car cautiously, his shoes tapping softly on the asphalt. Through the slightly cracked window, he saw Darius fast asleep in the reclined driver's seat, a thin blanket pulled up to his chin. In the back seat, neatly arranged, were a small duffel bag, a stack of folded clothes, and a plastic container with a toothbrush and soap. Kennedy stepped back, his chest tightening. His driver, his trusted, impeccable driver, was homeless. The realization wasn't just a shock. It was a call to action. Kennedy had spent years in public service advocating for the people of Louisiana, but this was personal. Darius wasn't a statistic or a policy issue. He was a man with a story, and Kennedy wanted to know it. He returned to his car, his mind racing. Confronting Darius now in the middle of the night would only embarrass him. A man who took such care to hide his situation had pride, and Kennedy respected that. Instead, he decided to learn more. The next morning over coffee, he called Claire again. Find out what you can about Darius Wells. Employment history, education, anything public. No digging into private stuff. Claire was efficient, and by afternoon, she had a thin file on her desk. He's been with the car service for a year, she reported. Perfect record. Before that, he was a security guard at a mall, and before that, he worked as a hospital orderly. He started an electrical engineering degree at a community college, but didn't finish. Dropped out 3 years ago. Kennedy leaned forward. Any idea why Claire hesitated? His mother passed away around that time. Cancer. That's all I could find without crossing lines. Kennedy nodded, staring out his office window. Medical bills, grief, and unfinished degree. It wasn't hard to piece together. Darius had sacrificed everything to care for his mother, and now he was paying the price. Over the next few days, Kennedy watched Darius closely, but not obviously. He kept their rides as routine as ever, asking about the weather or local news. But he noticed things he'd missed before, the way Darius always arrived early. His car spotless despite being his home. The way he answered questions with precision, never wasting words. The quiet dignity in his every move. One morning, as they drove to a meeting, Kennedy decided to test a theory. Darius, you ever think about energy costs? All this talk about renewables, but the tech is still pricey for most folks. Any ideas on that? Darius glanced in the rearview mirror, surprised. Well, sir, I've read a bit about it. Solar panels are getting cheaper, but the real issue is storage. Batteries degrade too fast for small businesses or homes to rely on them. Kennedy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. Darius hesitated, then continued. There's research on solid-state electrolytes that could make batteries last longer. If you could scale that for, say, a small shop, it'd cut energy costs without needing a big grid tie-in. Kennedy nodded, impressed. You read up on this stuff for fun. Darius's face warmed slightly. Something like that, sir. The conversation stuck with Kennedy. Darius wasn't just parroting articles. He was thinking like an engineer, connecting ideas to real-world problems. That evening, alone in his office, Kennedy made a call to an old friend, Marcus Tate, who ran a tech startup in Baton Rouge focused on energy-efficient devices. Marcus, you still looking for sharp minds? Kennedy asked. Always, Marcus replied. Why, you got someone? Kennedy smiled. Maybe. I've got a guy who knows his stuff but never got to finish his degree. You got any small projects he could tackle, see what he's got? Marcus didn't hesitate. Send him my way. We're working on a low-cost energy monitor for small businesses. If he's as good as you say, he could help. Kennedy hung up, feeling a spark of excitement. This wasn't about charity. It was about opportunity, about giving a man a chance to show what he could do. The next afternoon, as Darius drove him to a lunch meeting, Kennedy broached the subject. Darius, you ever think about getting back into engineering? Darius's hands tightened on the wheel. Used to, sir. Life got in the way. Kennedy nodded, keeping his tone light. I know a guy runs a tech company here in town. They're working on some energy-saving tech. Thought you might want to talk to him, maybe pitch an idea or two. Darius blinked, caught off guard. Me, sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified. Kennedy waved a hand. Qualifications are overrated. It's about what you know and what you can do. I'll set up a meeting. No pressure, just a conversation. Darius nodded slowly, a mix of doubt and curiosity in his eyes. Thank you, sir. I'd appreciate that. As they pulled up to the restaurant, Kennedy handed Darius a card with Marcus's contact info. Call him tomorrow. Tell him I sent you. Darius took the card, his fingers brushing the embossed letters. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared to entertain hope. That night, parked in his usual lot, Darius stared at the card under the dim glow of his phone. He opened an engineering journal, skimming an article on energy monitoring systems. His mind buzzed with ideas, but doubt crept in. What if he failed? What if he wasn't good enough? He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task. He had a chance, one chance, to prove he was more than a driver. Across town, Kennedy sat in his study, the rain starting again. He thought of Darius, of the man's quiet strength, and knew he'd made the right call. This was just the beginning, but for Darius Wells, it was the first step toward a future he'd almost given up on. The Baton Rouge morning was heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and made every breath feel like a chore. Darius Wells woke at 4:45 a.m., his back stiff from another night in the reclined driver's seat of his sedan. The grocery store parking lot was silent save for the distant hum of a delivery truck. He rubbed his eyes, checked his phone still half charged, and reached for the card Senator John Kennedy had given him yesterday. Marcus Tate, CEO of Greenwave Technologies, with a phone number and email scrawled in sharp ink. Darius's heart thudded as he reread it, the weight of the opportunity settling in. He had a meeting with Marcus in 2 days to discuss a potential project, a chance to prove he could be more than a driver. But doubt gnawed at him. He hadn't touched a real engineering problem in years, not since he'd left college to care for his mother. Could he still do this? He pushed the thought aside, grabbing his duffel bag. There was no time for second-guessing. He had to get to the gym shower and be at Kennedy's residence by 7:00 a.m. At the gym, Darius moved quickly, washing up in the locker room and shaving at the sink when no one was around. The mirror reflected a man who looked older than his 32 years, with lines etched around his eyes from sleepless nights and endless worry. But those eyes still burned with determination. He thought of his mother, Rita, who'd worked double shifts as a nurse to send him to a good school. Education's the one thing nobody can take from you, she'd always said. Darius had been halfway through his electrical engineering degree when her cancer diagnosis upended everything. He'd chosen her over his studies, and he'd never regretted it. But the cost had been steep grief debt, and a life now lived in a car. As he brushed his teeth, he whispered to himself, "Just one shot. That's all I need." By 6:45 a.m., he was parked outside Kennedy's residence, his blue button-up shirt pressed as best he could manage with the gym's hand dryer. The senator emerged right on time, his briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. "Morning, Darius," Kennedy said, sliding into the back seat. "Sleep well?" Darius forced a smile. "Yes, sir." "You," Kennedy chuckled. "Well enough. You call Marcus yet?" Darius nodded. "Meeting set for Wednesday, sir." "Thank you again." Kennedy waved a hand. "Don't thank me yet. Show him what you've got." The drive to a local community center was quiet, with Kennedy tapping away on his phone. But Darius's mind was elsewhere, racing with ideas for the meeting with Marcus. Greenwave Technologies was working on energy-efficient devices for small businesses, Kennedy had said. Darius had spent the previous night at the public library using the free Wi-Fi to read up on energy monitoring systems. He'd found a recent article about smart meters that could optimize power usage in real time, and it sparked an idea for a low-cost device that could help small shops cut their electricity bills. But reading articles was one thing. Designing a working prototype was another. As they pulled up to the community center, Kennedy glanced up. "You nervous about meeting Marcus?" Darius hesitated, then nodded. "A bit, sir. It's been a while since I worked on anything technical." Kennedy leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You've got the brains, Darius. I heard it in the way you talked about batteries the other day. Just be yourself." Darius managed a nod, the senator's words settling his nerves, if only slightly. After dropping Kennedy off, Darius had 3 hours before his next pickup. He drove to the library, claiming a corner table near an outlet. The computers were old, their fans whirring loudly, but they were his lifeline. He opened his notebook, a battered spiral pad filled with sketches and calculations, and began outlining his idea: a compact energy monitor that used machine learning to predict and adjust power usage for small businesses. It would be affordable, easy to install, and compatible with existing electrical systems. He lost himself in the work, jotting down equations and searching for open-source software he could adapt. By the time he left to pick up Kennedy, he had a rough plan, but it was far from ready. That evening, after driving Kennedy to a dinner meeting, Darius started his food delivery shift. For 5 hours, he crisscrossed Baton Rouge, dropping off pizzas and takeout to tired families and college students. Some tipped, most didn't. One customer complained that her fries were soggy, though Darius had delivered them in under 10 minutes. He apologized, kept his head down, and moved on. By midnight, his eyes burned with fatigue, but he couldn't stop. He drove to a 24-hour diner, ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, and spread his notes across the table. The waitress, a woman named Ruby, with a kind smile, refilled his cup without charging. "Working late, huh?" she asked, glancing at his diagrams. "Something like that," Darius replied, too focused to elaborate. The next day followed the same grueling pattern. Darius woke early, showered at the gym, drove Kennedy to meetings, and squeezed in library time to refine his energy monitor design. Marcus had emailed him specifics about the project. Greenwave needed a prototype for a device that could reduce energy costs by at least 15% for small businesses with a production cost under $50 per unit. It was a tall order, but Darius saw a path forward. He'd use a microcontroller for the brains paired with a simple sensor array to track power usage. The challenge was the software writing an algorithm that could predict usage patterns without requiring expensive hardware. During a break between Kennedy's meetings, Darius sat in his car sketching circuit diagrams on the back of a receipt. Kennedy noticed climbing into the back seat for the next pickup. "That for Marcus?" he asked, nodding at the receipt. Darius nodded, a bit embarrassed. "Just some ideas, sir." Kennedy leaned forward, peering at the sketch. "Looks like more than ideas to me. You know, I was talking to Marcus yesterday. Told him you've got a knack for this stuff." Darius's cheeks warmed. "I appreciate that, sir." Kennedy sat back, his tone casual but pointed. "Don't sell yourself short, Darius. You're not just a driver with a hobby. You're an engineer who's been out of the game too long." The words stuck with Darius, fueling him through another sleepless night at the diner. Ruby slipped him a free biscuit when she saw him hunched over his notebook at 2:00 a.m. "You a student or something?" she asked. Darius hesitated, then shrugged. "Used to be. Working on a project now." She nodded, leaving him to his work. By Wednesday morning, the day of the meeting, Darius was running on fumes. He'd managed 4 hours of sleep, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned his shirt. The library computers had crashed the previous night, forcing him to rewrite half his code by hand. But he had a plan, a detailed proposal for the energy monitor complete with a schematic cost estimates and a rough algorithm. He drove to Kennedy's residence, his stomach knotted with nerves. The senator was waiting, dressed in a crisp suit, his eyes sharp. "Big day," Kennedy said, settling into the back seat. "You ready?" Darius nodded, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "I think so, sir," Kennedy chuckled. "You'll do fine. Marcus isn't looking for a polished presentation. He wants ideas that work." The meeting was set for 10:00 a.m. at Green Wave's modest office in a Baton Rouge business park. Darius dropped Kennedy off at a local charity event, then drove to the meeting, arriving 15 minutes early. The office was small but modern, with glass walls and a hum of activity. Marcus Tate greeted him at the door, a wiry man in his 40s, with a quick handshake and a no-nonsense demeanor. "So you're Kennedy's guy," Marcus said, leading Darius to a conference room. "He says you've got something worth hearing." Darius swallowed, setting his notebook on the table. "I hope so, sir." Two other engineers joined them, both in their late 20s, their expressions skeptical as they sized up Darius. He was, after all, just a driver, with no degree and no formal experience. Marcus didn't waste time. "We're building a low-cost energy monitor for small businesses. Our current model's too expensive, and the software's clunky. Kennedy thinks you might have a fresh take." "So what's your pitch?" Darius took a deep breath, his hands steadying as he opened his notebook. He walked them through his idea, a device that combined a cheap microcontroller with a predictive algorithm using real-time data to optimize power usage. He sketched the circuit on a whiteboard, explaining how it could be produced for under $40 per unit. The engineers peppered him with questions, some polite, others sharp. "What about scalability?" one asked. "How do you handle variable loads?" Darius answered each one, drawing on the journals he'd studied and the ideas he'd honed in the library. When he faltered on a software question, he admitted it but offered a workaround using open-source tools. Marcus listened intently, his pen tapping the table. By the end, the room was quiet. "Not bad," Marcus said, leaning back. "You've got a week to build a working prototype. If it delivers, we'll talk about a job." "Deal." Darius nodded, his heart racing. "Deal." The next 7 days were a blur of exhaustion and determination. Darius couldn't quit his driving or delivery jobs. He needed the money to survive, but every free moment was devoted to the prototype. He worked at the library during the day, coding on sluggish computers, and at the diner at night, soldering components under the dim light of a booth. Kennedy, sensing the pressure, made a subtle move. During a drive, he handed Darius a temporary access badge to Green Wave's office. "Marcus says drivers can use the break room when they're waiting for clients," Kennedy said casually. "Might have some computers you can use after hours." Darius caught the hint, gratitude swelling in his chest. That night he slipped into Green Wave's office, finding a quiet workstation with powerful software. For 4 hours, he coded, tested, and tweaked the prototype, taking shape. The device was simple, a small box with a digital display wired to a sensor that tracked power flow, but the algorithm was the key, predicting usage patterns to save energy. By day 5, Darius was barely sleeping, his body running on coffee and adrenaline. During a drive, Kennedy noticed his pallor. "You look like you're burning the candle at both ends," he said, his tone gentle but probing. "This project wearing you out?" Darius shook his head. "Just focused, sir." "I'm close." Kennedy nodded, but his eyes lingered as if he saw more than Darius let on. That evening, Darius hit a breakthrough. The algorithm stabilized, showing a simulated 18% energy savings in tests. He nearly laughed aloud in the empty office, the first spark of triumph in years. But the final day brought a setback. A component fried during testing, and Darius had to scramble to replace it, spending $20 he couldn't spare. He finished the prototype at 3:00 a.m., just hours before the deadline, collapsing in his car for a brief, dreamless sleep. The presentation was set for the following afternoon. Darius arrived at Greenwave, his prototype, in a small case, his shirt pressed, but his eyes bloodshot. Marcus and the engineers were waiting along with a surprise guest, Kennedy, sitting quietly in the back. Darius set up the device, his hands steady despite his nerves, and walked them through the demo. The monitor hummed to life, its display showing real-time power usage from a test circuit. He explained the algorithm showing data that projected 18% savings for a typical small business. The engineers tested it, throwing curveballs, sudden load changes, faulty inputs, but the device held up. Marcus crossed his arms, a slow smile spreading. "You built this in a week?" he asked. Darius nodded. "Yes, sir." The room was silent for a moment. Then Marcus turned to the engineers. "What do you think?" One, the skeptic from the first meeting, nodded grudgingly. "It's solid. Needs refinement, but it's better than our current model." Marcus looked at Darius. "You're hired. Junior engineer starting next week. Salary's enough to get you settled. We'll talk details tomorrow." Darius left the meeting in a daze, the weight of the moment sinking in. He'd done it, not just built a device, but earned a way out of his car, a path back to the life he'd lost. That evening, as he drove Kennedy home, the senator broke the silence. "Heard you knocked it out of the park." Darius smiled, his first real smile in weeks. "I tried, sir." Kennedy leaned forward, his voice warm. "You did more than try, Darius. You showed them who you are." As Darius dropped him off, Kennedy paused at the car door. "Check your email tonight. Marcus sent something you'll want to see." Later, parked in his lot, Darius opened his phone. An email from Marcus outlined the job offer, a $65,000 starting salary, benefits, and a small signing bonus, enough to rent a modest apartment to start chipping away at his mother's medical debt. But there was another email from an anonymous sender with a link to a new article on energy monitoring tech. The signature read simply, "A fellow enthusiast." Darius stared, a suspicion forming. Had Kennedy been sending these all along? The next morning, as Darius drove to the library to search for apartments, his phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. An audit had uncovered an additional $15,000 in unpaid bills from his mother's treatment, due within 60 days, or it would go to collections. The hope he'd felt hours ago dimmed, replaced by the familiar weight of debt. He gripped the wheel, his jaw tight. He'd come so far, but the past wasn't done with him yet. Across town, Kennedy sat in his office, reviewing a note from Claire about Darius's background. He'd seen the hospital letter fall from Darius's pocket during a recent drive, though he hadn't let on. The senator leaned back, his mind turning. Darius had proven himself, but this new burden could derail him. Kennedy picked up the phone, dialing Marcus. "That engineer you just hired," he said. "I've got an idea for a project he'd be perfect for." This wasn't over, not for Darius, and not for the man who'd seen his potential in a rain-soaked parking lot. The Baton Rouge evening was warm, the air thick with the scent of magnolias, as Darius Wells adjusted his tie in the small office of Greenwave Technologies. It had been 6 months since he'd transitioned from Senator John Kennedy's driver to a junior engineer, and tonight marked a milestone, the launch of the Restart Foundation, a program inspired by his journey from homelessness to opportunity. The company's courtyard was transformed, strung with soft lights and banners that read, "Second chances start here." Employees, community leaders, and a handful of reporters mingled their voices, a low hum against the backdrop of a jazz quartet. Darius stood near a display showcasing Greenwave's new energy monitor, the device he'd designed to cut power costs for small businesses. His name was on the patent, and the bonus from it had nearly cleared his mother's medical debt. But the real victory was the foundation, a vision Kennedy had championed to find and uplift talented people trapped by circumstance. Darius was its director, a role that felt both daunting and deeply personal. He glanced at his reflection in the office window. His suit was new, tailored, but simple, a far cry from the worn button-up he'd lived in a year ago. Yet the man staring back still carried the quiet determination that had kept him going through the darkest nights. Kennedy arrived just as the event began, his presence drawing eyes as he shook hands and exchanged greetings. He caught Darius's gaze across the courtyard and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the road they'd traveled. Darius took a deep breath, steadying himself. He was about to speak to a crowd that included people who'd once known him only as a driver, if they'd noticed him at all. Ruby, the waitress from the 24-hour diner, approached her blue dress, catching the light. "Look at you running the show," she said, her smile warm. Darius chuckled, embracing her. "Couldn't have done it without your coffee, Ruby." She laughed, handing him a small paper bag. "Still on the house," she said, winking. Inside was a fresh cup and a news clipping about his patent headlined, "From Hardship to Innovation, Local Engineers Breakthrough." Darius tucked it away, a mix of pride and embarrassment stirring within him. The article had revealed his past, but it also celebrated his work. And tonight, he'd lean into that. At 7:00 p.m., Kennedy took the stage, his Louisiana drawl cutting through the evening air. "Folks, welcome to the Restart Foundation launch," he began, his tone earnest. "This program is about finding brilliance where others might not look, in the folks working late shifts, struggling to make ends meet, but never giving up on their potential." He spoke of Greenwave's mission to innovate for the community, and how the foundation extended that ethos, offering training jobs and housing support to those with untapped talent. "We're not here to hand out charity," Kennedy said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "We're here to invest in people who can change the world if given a chance." He paused, then gestured to Darius. "And no one embodies that more than the man leading this effort, Darius Wells." The crowd applauded, and Darius stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding. He'd rehearsed his speech, but the weight of the moment standing before people who believed in him made it feel new. "Thank you, Senator Kennedy, and thank you all for being here." Darius began, his voice steady. "The Restart Foundation isn't just a program to me. It's personal. A year ago, I was sleeping in my car, driving by day and delivering food by night, trying to keep my head above water." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others wide-eyed. "I thought my dreams of being an engineer were gone, buried under medical debt and bad luck. But someone saw something in me, potential I wasn't sure I still had." He glanced at Kennedy, who gave a small smile. "This foundation is about seeing that potential in others, people who are working hard, who have skills and ideas, but need a door opened. We're starting with 10 participants, folks from all walks of life. A single mom who taught herself coding, a veteran who's a genius with electronics, a former teacher rebuilding after losing everything. They're not just employees. They're proof that talent is everywhere, if we look for it." Darius introduced the participants, who stood proudly in Greenwave uniforms. Each name drew applause, their stories a testament to resilience. As he spoke, he noticed a woman at the back of the crowd, escorted in by a staff member. It was Jessica, the hospital billing clerk, who'd helped him manage his mother's debt payments. She held an envelope, her expression nervous but kind. When Darius finished, she approached the stage. "Mr. Wells," she said, handing him the envelope. "The hospital board asked me to deliver this." Puzzled, Darius opened it, his breath catching as he read. The letter announced that a new financial counseling center at the hospital would be named the Rita Wells Care Hub, honoring his mother by helping families navigate medical costs without falling into debt. "This is incredible," Darius said, his voice thick. "Thank you," Jessica smiled. "You've inspired a lot of people, Mr. Wells." As she stepped away, Darius turned to Kennedy, a question in his eyes. "You're doing?" he asked quietly. Kennedy shrugged. "The hospital's idea. I might have suggested they focus on financial support with a donation to back it up." Darius nodded, understanding dawning. Kennedy hadn't just opened a door. He'd been quietly clearing the path. Kennedy returned to the microphone, the crowd quieting. "There's one more thing I'd like to share," he said, his tone softer. "When I first found Darius sleeping in his car, I wanted to help one man. But he changed my perspective as much as I hope we've changed his." He looked at Darius, his voice steady. "Your grit, your refusal to let go of your dreams, even when life hit hard. That's what sparked this foundation. And there's something you don't know." The crowd leaned in, sensing the weight of the moment. "I've been paying off your mother's medical debt bit by bit, not out of pity, but because I believed you had work to do, work that's now helping others." Darius froze, the words sinking in. The anonymous payments, the sudden relief from debt, it had been Kennedy all along. The crowd was silent, then erupted in applause, the sound washing over Darius like a wave. He fought back tears, the realization hitting him he'd been seen, truly seen, not as a victim, but as a man with something to offer. As the gala continued, Darius mingled with guests, sharing stories with the participants and thanking supporters. Ruby pulled him aside, her eyes bright. "Your mom would be so proud," she said. Darius nodded, his throat tight. "I hope so." Later, he found Kennedy near a display of the energy monitor. "Senator, I don't know how to thank you," Darius said. Kennedy waved a hand. "You already have by proving me right. This foundation's just the start. We're planning to expand to 3 more cities, and I'm counting on you to lead it." Darius smiled, a sense of purpose settling in. "I'm ready." The lesson of Darius's journey was clear, woven into every moment of the night. Compassion and opportunity can unlock potential that circumstance has hidden. The Restart Foundation wasn't about fixing people. It was about recognizing their worth and giving them the tools to shine. For the crowd, the message was a call to action. Look beyond appearances, value resilience, and understand that small acts, a conversation, a chance, a belief, can ripple outward, changing lives. Darius had learned to trust in his own strength, but more than that, he'd learned the power of being seen. As he stood under the lights, surrounded by people whose futures he was helping shape, he knew this was his mother's legacy too, a reminder that no one should be defined by their hardest days, but by what they can achieve when given a second chance.